Thanks for the great turnout. The delayed start. Ruetsche talking about Renormalization Group Realism.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I want to start by admitting this talk's a ripoff in a couple of senses. One is it's closely related to a talk I gave at the PSA in Atlanta. I know some of you were there, and some of you not here were there too. This time I'll have more than 20 minutes, so maybe I'll get more. The question about sort of perennial question about license to believe the success of our best theories, a way of casting mode, admitting it's possible that what the world is really like, what current, and for the connections to emerge, approach to the question of what we're licensed to believe now, given our current theories about the future of science, about the way the world really is, by renormalization. That in some sense there's going to be some throat clearing, some stage setting, some framing of the kind of general questions by way of circumscribing position, humble empiricism, and saying a few words about the role of projects of interpreting. And then I'm going to describe a way of buttressing realism, refining realism in the face of sort of we know, as it's accompanied by a way of circumscribing the content of current theories appropriate for belief. I'm calling Renormalization Group Realism, that has the significant philosophy of science virtue of sort of arising attention to foundations problems, in particular physical theories. So I think it's a really cool position, and because I think it's a really cool position, I'm going to do it the courtesy of criticizing it as much as I can. So the last bit of the talk will be raising some questions of articulation for Renormalization Group Realism. Okay, so that's where we're going. This is the throat clearing part.
I'm sorry, they're having trouble with the sound over there.
Oh, is it because I talk?
After all, I don't know. Yeah, okay, that's what it is. That should be better. Is that better?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, big picture position I'm calling hubristic realism, sort of illustrated by the following quotation from Tim Maudlin. Kind of idea is what our best current science does is tells us what the world really is like fundamentally. Metaphysics, ontology is the most generic study of what is. Physics tells us what things are really like. So the proper object of most metaphysics is the careful analysis of our best scientific theories, and especially of fundamental physical theories, with the goal of determining what they imply about the constitution of the physical world. I'm going to characterize this position, hubristic realism, maybe in an unusual way. I'm going to characterize it as an attitude about how the following two questions are related. So they're questions about a successful scientific theory, T, quantum field theory, general relativity. They're questions about a successful scientific theory, T. One question is, what does this theory say the world is like? What picture of the world does this theory offer? That's an interpretive question. I'm calling it question I. Another question that's natural, almost compelling to raise about a successful scientific theory is, why does it work as well as it does? Sort of an explanatory question. What explains its success? And I think one way to think of hubristic realism is as the position that these are different aspects of the same question. That what it takes to understand why successful science succeeds as well as it does is to appreciate that successful science is getting the world right, and it's getting the world right explains its success. Okay. So T succeeds because the actual world is one of the worlds possible according to T. Explanation of scientific success offered by hubristic realism. So contrast class, humble empiricism. This isn't Van Frossen's constructive empiricism. It's another kind of empiricist position I think is consistent and attractive and interesting. So again, I'm presenting as an attitude towards some successful piece of science, I'm calling T. And the attitude is, okay, it's successful, but here's my answer to the explanatory question. Successful not because it's latching onto hidden springs, not because it's latching onto deep structure, fundamental structure, metaphysics, It's successful because in experimentally accessible regimes, in the regimes where we test and apply the theory, it's approximating the predictions of some more fundamental theory. Okay, so I'm introducing this recurring character T exclamation point. This is the hypothesized theory, fundamental complete physical theory. It gets everything right all the way down. Fundamental complete physical theory, T. And so why do our current successful theories work as well as they do? The humble empiricist answer is, in those regions where we apply them, they mimic the deliverances of this fundamental theory. Okay, so this isn't to deny that it's possible for a physical theory to give a true account of hidden springs. It's just to offer, instead of the truth of the account of hidden springs offered by a successful theory as an explanation of that theory's success, the alternative explanation that it's mimicking the implications of the true account for the phenomena it's applied to. Okay, so what's at issue between the humble empiricist and the hubristic realist is to what extent successful science affords grasp of hidden springs. And here I'm introducing a term of endearment for kind of saving the phenomena, for applying successfully to experimental accessible regimes without grasping hidden springs. I'm calling such a theory merely empirically adequate. The humble empiricist position acknowledges the possibility of a true, self-sufficient, complete physical theory, T. The question it articulates is how much can T tell us, how much does T tell us about this true underlying theory? And like the hubristic realist, the humble empiricist recognizes that theoretical success requires an explanation. It just offers an explanation different in kind from the hubristic realists. So these are some sort of positions. I might skip this aside about explanation in the interest of time, but the point is, entangled with these sorts of attitudes are also attitudes towards what it takes to really explain something. So dramatizing the difference between hubristic realism and humble empiricism, and this is laying the groundwork for a point I want to pick up later. So here's a question. Is Newton's law of universal gravitation, is it approximately true, in a sense appropriate for hubristic realism? Its hidden springs, sort of naively, are a central force acting instantaneously at a distance across Euclidean tree space. And from the vantage of general relativity, an imperfect surrogate, I mean, that's the whole point of emergent spacetime for fundamental theory, but from the vantage of sort of a successful theory, general relativity, none of these hidden springs exist, no central forces, no Euclidean tree space, no action at a distance. And so a natural thought is that Newton's law of universal gravitation doesn't describe hidden springs. It offers excellent devices for coordinating experimentally successful phenomena. It's not that the law of universal gravitation is in any real sense approximately true. It's just that it's as if the law of universal gravitation were true. So contrast this, it's not approximately true at all, with a situation where the hidden springs are awfully a lot like the hidden springs posited by Newton's gravitation. For instance, it's something very close to a 1 over r squared central force law, or something playing out in something very much like a 3 plus 1 dimensional spacetime. In that case, where those are the hidden springs, it does seem appropriate to say Newton's law is approximately true. In the case where you do away with Euclidean tree space entirely and central forces acting at a distance, approximate truth seems like the wrong way to describe the theory. Okay, sort of last setting up slide. Very, very familiar challenges to scientific realism, especially its hubristic form, the mere fact of underdetermination, its dramatization of the history of science, and the marshalling of that dramatization by the pessimistic meta-induction, the problem of unconceived alternatives. They're all kind of generically ways of suggesting, getting you to worry that whatever hidden springs our favorite theories offer us, they're absent from T, the real fundamental complete theory of the world. Those are standard challenges. A standard response is this divide et impera response. It's I think in its most interesting form, where it gives us a guide to how to be realist about theories we have now. And this response invokes a selection principle that right now, given our best current scientific theories, identifies belief-worthy aspects of those theories. A symptom of the worthiness of these aspects for belief is that they persist in future theories. The diagnosis of this kind of realism, of why these aspects persist. They're going to be there in future theories because they're latching onto the hidden springs. And note that in order for this position to really be a realist position, it had better be that the aspects latched onto aren't mere phenomena, but something that describes the world beneath the phenomena. Otherwise, this kind of selective empiricism seems like it collapses to humble empiricism. Okay, the renormalization group realism I'm going to present as a explicit, motivated by physics, deeply sane strategy for selective realism, a way of circumscribing aspects of current theories worthy of belief. So overview and disclaimers. So this position is suggested by the work of a lot of people who have been brave enough to take on and think about genuine quantum field theories, interacting quantum field theories. They include James Fraser, Lee Hancock-Lee, Michael Miller, Porter Williams. David Wallace has a semi-old paper about why Lagrangian field theory is not in such horrible conceptual shape. So the position is related to the work of the people I've named, but shouldn't be blamed on any of them. This is me, given considerations they adduce, framing a position that seems an interesting position worth developing. I think in all their work there's more subtlety and depth than the position I frame reflects. And what it is a strategy specific to quantum field theory. That's interesting. For articulating a realism evolved to meet the pressures exerted by things like the pessimistic meta-induction. And it's a strategy rooted in a response to a foundation problem proper to QFT, something James Fraser calls QFTs, real problem. Because I'm keeping track of the role of interpretation in different attitudes towards scientific theories, I'll remark that some advocates of using renormalization group considerations to sort the wheat from the chaff in our current theories are suspicious of the standard sense of interpretation as an account of a theory's truth conditions. I'll get back to that. And then I want to stress, I think a very interesting position. I think it profoundly the right way of thinking about these theories. So although I'm critical, it's not because I think it's a dead end. Okay, so the foundational problem, the solution to which renormalization group realism is inspired by, arises for perturbative quantum field theory. So here the game is you want to study interactions. You've got a free theory, a non-interacting theory, you've got under conceptual control. It's got a free Lagrangian, you know how solutions to equations of motion determined by that Lagrangian behave. And your strategy is to get a picture of the interacting theory by assuming it's a small modification of the free theory. So it's the free Lagrangian plus an interaction Lagrangian with a small parameter lambda tracking the modification. And then the thought is understanding the solutions to the full Lagrangian can be mediated by thinking of them as modifications to solutions to the free Lagrangian. Modifications encapsulated by a perturbative expansion in orders of the interaction parameter lambda. So the free solution plus a first order correction for lambda plus a second order correction for lambda squared. And the thought is we got control of the free theory and we can build off of that control of the interacting theory. And from the equations, from the solutions follow things like S-matrix elements and endpoint functions that carry the empirical content of the interacting theory. Okay, so it's a nice idea, but it runs into a number of problems. I think Mike's going to talk about 3 of them tomorrow, but what I'm going to talk about here, we crank through the details of the perturbative expansion. Individual terms in the perturbative expansion, terms at each order, diverge, because they involve things like integrating over all momentum modes, something that diverges as momentum go to infinity. And so that means the empirical commodities you're interested in, you're getting these pointless infinities as the answers. Your interacting theory isn't delivering the empirical goods. Okay, but you don't panic. It's a problem, but there might be a way to solve it. Approach historically developed proceeds by a number of phases. So your problem is this integral over all momentum modes diverges. So fix it in several stages. First stage, integrating from 0 to infinity gives you a divergent integral. Impose a cutoff. Impose it by that cutoff. And now you've got a finite integral. But that sort of introduces a new problem. The new problem is the finite numbers you're getting by imposing the cutoff depend on the cutoff you've imposed. That makes your theory seem suspiciously indexed to your choice of cutoff. But there's a fix for this too. And the fix for it involves a lot of craftiness. But the upshot of the craftiness is, it turns out, the physics community can often find ways to massage the old Lagrangian into a new form, where the bad behavior of the integrals is absorbed into coefficients with the feature that as you take the ultraviolet cutoff to infinity, sort of throw away the artificial cutoff, the terms in the perturbative expansion at each order converge and their dependence on the cutoff disappears. So you start with the naive initial Lagrangian, you do this crafty rearranging, canceling, renormalization process. You wind up with a new Lagrangian, function of maybe the same fields, maybe different fields, and the parameters appearing in the new Lagrangian are reparameterized. So the original Lagrangian, the bare parameters turn into renormalized parameters, renormalized mass, renormalized field, renormalized complements. And if you can pull this off, if you can pull this renormalization off so you get a well-behaved Lagrangian on the right-hand side that involves only a finite number of terms, your theory is said to be perturbatively renormalizable. There's something nice and tractable about it. One way it's nice and tractable is natural source of paranoia is the Lagrangian I wind up with might be dependent on details of my renormalization procedure. I mean, there's kind of lots of different ways of doing this. They're not all the same. That procedure dependence is disturbing. But a lot of the sting of that is removed if the parameters appearing in the renormalized Lagrangian, the finitely many parameters appearing in the renormalized Lagrangian, can be determined experimentally. Then the Lagrangian you wind up with is determined by experiment, independent of dicey cutoff procedures, renormalization procedures. So that's a picture of how to solve the problem, and the incredible, amazing thing is that for a lot of interacting quantum field theories, the 20th century, they are perturbatively renormalizable. You get a well-behaved renormalized Lagrangian out the other end of this renormalization procedure. Okay. But that entails a problem of interpretation of its own. I mean, I think especially for the people who lived through the era of figuring out how to bring quantum field theoretical Lagrangians under perturbative control, things like approaches that would work to 13th order would be discovered to fail at 14th order. There's a sense that they didn't really understand what it was they were doing, notwithstanding getting neat answers out the other end. So there's this thing everybody quotes from Feynman's book QED. The shell game that we play is technically called renormalization, but no matter how clever the word, it's still what I would call a Dibby process. Sort of a more stately. I've just described a way of getting out the other end of your quantum field theory, a technique for generating predictions. It's an approximative technique. But remember the interpretive question. Why does the approximative technique work as well as it does? Nothing in how the approximative technique is presented or described gives you a picture of the underlying reality that explains why the numbers emerging from the approximative technique latch on to things in nature. So this is a quotation from James Fraser's PhD thesis. The success of the perturbative approach is mysterious, I suggest, precisely because it dodges the question of what an interacting QFT is. There is an absence of any non-perturbative characterization of the system of interest. Doesn't make the whole process incoherent, but it undercuts the possibility of telling a physical story which could explain its success. So the real problem is what's physically going on that that Lagrangians wrought by perturbative renormalization techniques work as well as they do. Let's go with that. And here the renormalization group considerations enter as a strategy for answering this what's going on that perturbative approximation techniques work as they do question. So here's the basic picture this is all going to be loose into first order approximation. Here's the basic picture. So we're going to think of a theory as a Lagrangian. We're going to think of a Lagrangian as a function of space-time fields and their space-time derivatives. And that means if we just fix on a convention for ordering fields and their derivatives, we can code the Lagrangian defining a theory by an infinite vector where the entries in the vector are the coupling coefficients for the fields and their derivatives. So sort of one-to-one correspondence between theories and Lagrangians encapsulated by infinite vector CIs of all the possible coefficients with which all the possible fields and their space-time derivatives could appear in the Lagrangian. And I'll introduce a sort of new consideration. Introduce the idea that Lagrangians govern physics at scales. So superscript Lagrangian L by mu is some energy scale, scale at which phenomena emerge, scale at which tracks experimentally accessible regimes. So the idea is lambda, L mu, the Lagrangian, taken as operating at scale mu, describes physics at scale mu. And once we've adorned the Lagrangian by the scale we take the Lagrangian to be operating at, we can think of it as an element of a space consisting of such entities, a space consisting of Lagrangians taken to operate at scales. And here's an interesting element of this space. Lagrangian operating at scale capital lambda. So capital lambda, I'm going to think of as a more fundamental scale than the scales accessible to us. Maybe it's the Planck scale, but at any rate, it's higher energy scale than scales accessible to us. I'm going to introduce little scripty L as R scale, energy scale phenomena we can access in scattering experiments and so forth. Okay, so thinking about the space of Lagrangians at scales, thinking of R scale lambda, thinking that the space includes a lot of Lagrangians at scales more fundamental than our scale, like capital lambda, a burning question occurs to us. And the burning question is, take some Lagrangian operating at a scale more fundamental than experimentally accessible scales. What does this more fundamental Lagrangian imply about physics at scales accessible to us? That's the burning question. In thinking of the space, you can introduce a gadget acting on the space, keeping track of answers to this question. The gadget is this, and how the gadget works is you give it a more fundamental Lagrangian, act on it with the gadget, and it gives you the Lagrangian induced at R scale by that more fundamental Lagrangian. Insofar as the Lagrangians are one-to-one correspondent with infinite vectors keeping track of the coupling coefficients featuring them, you can also think of the same gadget as acting on those coefficient vectors. The point is the gadget extracts from a more fundamental Lagrangian the implication for physics at R scale of that Lagrangian and packs those implications into a Lagrangian taken as operative at R scale. So, induced Lagrangian is the effective at scale little L Lagrangian induced by the underlying at scale capital L Lagrangian. And the name for this family of transformations, to the horror of mathematicians everywhere, because there's really a semi-group, is the renormalization group. Okay, so that's a nice picture, but it's a nice picture about which some natural questions emerge. I mean, the picture is these QFTs we're dealing with, including the ones that are perturbatively renormalizable. Face it, they're probably merely effective theories. They're low energy effective theories. They're induced by unknown higher energy theories. And they're connected to these unknown higher energy theories by this renormalization group flow. Nice picture, but it doesn't really enable us to make much headway on the real problem of understanding why perturbative renormalization works as well as we do, for a number of reasons. I mean, one is just the obvious. We don't know the high energy theories. So how does this picture of this space, flows induced by the renormalization group, really help us identify what effective theories should work at our scale, or what high energy field theories are related to them? Another sort of worry, it's crucially important for getting meaningful physics out of renormalized Lagrangians that they have only finitely many fields appearing significantly. But nothing about the renormalization group picture offers us any guarantee that the effective theory is going to involve a vector of coupling coefficients with only finitely many coefficients. Put another way, nothing about the renormalization group picture gives us any assurance that effective theories at our scale are going to involve only finitely many fields. But it could be that if the action of the renormalization group on the space of theories acting at scales has certain nice features, those worries dissolve. So here are some nice features it might have. It might have the nice features that all high-energy theories flow to the same subspace of theories effective at a scale, little l. So call such a subspace TF of L. Think of it as a subspace of effective theories at our scale. If this space is finite dimensional, like the whole space, wildly infinitely dimensional, but if the space to which all high energy theories flow, the space of effective theories at our scale, is finite dimensional, that means the element of that space that actually governs physics in our world can be identified by making the finitely many measurements necessary to locate it in this finite dimensional subspace. So that means the effective theory for us at our scale can be fixed by a finite number of experimental measurements. So if the renormalization group flow has these features, then the overall picture of our theory being an effective theory living in a space of theories striated by renormalization group flows starts to be a bit more reassuring that there's something we're talking about when we're doing perturbative normalized quantum field theory. Okay. And for the theories we care about, the renormalization group flow does have these nice features. So this is one of the cores of Wallace's defense of the conceptual decency of Lagrangian quantum field theory. So introduce the notion of a fixed point, say a renormalization group flow on the space of theories at scales has a fixed point at a scale. If there's some coupling vector for physics at that scale, such that for all higher energy theories, that coupling vector is invariant under the renormalization group flow from those higher energy theories to that scale. So the idea is this coupling vector, this fixed point, encapsulates features of physics at this scale that are invariant under what the underlying physics is. No matter what the high energy physics is, the fixed point tells you what trace it's going to leave on physics at our scale. And again, if this fixed point has only finitely many components, then the hope that we can characterize physics at our scale just by infinitely many measurements is borne out. And yeah, our best quantum field theories have this property. It's a remarkable property of local quantum field theories that for a certain subset of theories, blah, 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 this works out. There's fixed points. They're characterizable and identifiable by way of finitely many measurements. So these fixed points encapsulate the contribution to physics at scales we can access of the physics we don't know about. And in the case that the fixed point has only finitely many entries, that contribution can be fixed experimentally and is independent of worries about diciness of our renormalization techniques. We can figure out physics at the scales we care about simply by measuring coupling coefficients. And this isn't a pipe dream. There's like analytic formal results in the vicinity. The kind of cleanest is due to Polchinski, so the space of theories he considers.
Just go back.
Yeah.
You don't mean this, there shouldn't be a star on that last CLI, should there? Because the fixed point you just compute right there. We can come back to it.
Yeah, and that's all right. Okay, so yeah. So the Polchinski result, dimensional scalar theory, and weakly coupled interactions with small coupling constants. So the renormalization group flow he defines is required to be such that the effective Lagrangian and the upshot acting on the underlying Lagrangian with the renormalization group both determine the same endpoint functions, the same correlation functions at the scale L. And the motivation of using this as criterion for whether the renormalization group makes sense is that this coincidence of the endpoint functions is sufficient for the effective theory, and you get by acting on the underlying theory with the renormalization group to reveal empirical content. And he studies this space and proves it's got a three-dimensional surface of attraction. That all high energy physics flows to a three-dimensional surface of effective theories on a low energy scale. A surface parameterized by an effective mass, an effective coupling, and an effective field. And the perturbatively renormalized Lagrangian for the phi-4 theory that we know and love from renormalization techniques lives in this space. And so this all lends credence to the idea that, the following solution to the real problem. The real problem, perturbative normalization, seems desperate. It's just an approximation technique. Why does it work as well as it does? The solution is the approximations are approximations to high energy physics, physics of this space on which the renormalization group acts. So high energy physics, underlying physics at accessible scales. And the reason high energy physics induces tractable effective theories characterized by perturbative renormalization, is that effective physics at our scale requires only finitely many renormalized parameters to specify. Put another way, the surface of effective theories at scale L is finite dimensional. And what this all means is, despite not knowing the high energy details, we can completely identify the effective physics at the scale we care about by measuring these finitely many parameters, these finitely many couplets, and locating the effective theory in the surface of effective theories. So what came out the other end of perturbative renormalization was one of the effective theories in the surface. And we get the effective physics right, even if our cutoff procedures aren't perfectly univocal. Okay, so that's all background. A foundational problem in QFT, an approach to it by way of renormalization group considerations. And now the thought that leads us back to the kind of debate over scientific realism is these very resources that enable us to adopt this perspective on why perturbative renormalization works as well as it does also give the realist a precise, articulate, explicit way of pursuing the divide and conquer strategy. So the challenge for the realist, in light of the history of science being a history of discarded theories, is to identify a locus of commitment not undermined by the pessimistic meta-induction. And a strategy for identifying this locus I'm calling renormalization group realism makes use of a robustness criteria. So the thought is, what we should believe in, what we should invest with significance, representational significance among our current theories, is what's invariant under the action of the renormalization group. So what's invariant under the action of the renormalization group, insensitive choice of cutoff, is what's real at the scale of the effective theory we care about. So what's the justification? Well, these invariants are going to survive as elements of physics at the scale we care about, no matter what the high energy physics is, no matter what the underlying truth is, no matter what the future of science is, these invariants are going to survive. Notice about this, renormalization group realism only helps out people who want to be realist about theories in the ambit of renormalization group analysis. So in that sense, it's a local realism. It's not a prescription for selective realism that applies to any theory whatsoever, just to certain sorts of theories that fall into embrace of certain sorts of analyses. And then this is the thing I think is really cool about it. Renormalization group realism is judo-like. It turns sort of the arsenal of the empiricist, which includes underdetermination and agnosticism, against the empiricist. It turns those into realist resources. We don't know what's going on. Lots of things might be going on. We don't have to take a stand on what really lies beneath. The thought is, thanks to renormalization group approaches, we can identify robust features of our current theories in spite of that agnosticism and underdetermination. And you can find positions similar to this in the work of James Fraser and Porter Williams. So that's the position. That's why I think it's cool. And now the undue skepticism. So I'm going to semi-quickly raise questions about whether this renormalization group realism is a viable alternative to what I call humble empiricism. So there's going to be questions about viability, about how persuasive a response to the kind of worries inspired by the pessimistic meta-induction this move is, this robustness move is. And there's going to be worries about alternativity, whether what winds up as the locus of commitment is something that really distinguishes the position from humble empiricism. So I'm going to take those two questions in turn, skip that. a viability worry, how good a solution to the, how good a defense to the skeptical assaults is this. I'm going to develop this way. So the pessimistic meta-induction is that our best theories, no matter how much we love them, we're going to ditch them in favor of some unknown future theory. Some unknown future theory that undermines the picture of the world offered by our best current theories. The response to this concern by the Renormalization Group Realist is, look, for certain theories we've got a way to say, no matter what the true theory is, these features of our current theories, the ones robust under the Renormalization Group Flow, will be retained. And so they deserve our commitment. That they're retained indicates they're latching onto theories, to features of the world that are really there. They're appropriate fodder for realism. Okay, that's the response. Here's what a gadfly says. So this is pursuing the skeptical worry. Renormalization group considerations, they assure me these features will persist no matter what the underlying truth is, provided the underlying truth is in the space of theories on which the renormalization group acts. Supposing there's an explicit space at hand, usually there isn't really. But the space of theories on which the renormalization group acts, the setting of results about the action of the renormalization group, it could be so circumscribed that there's fundamental physical possibilities that lie outside it. And the fundamental physical possibilities lying outside it could be skeptical in this sense. They could afford pictures of the world that undermine the ontological commitments suggested by applying renormalization group analyses to our best current theories. So that's the worry that insofar as the space of theories on which the renormalization group acts is limited, this kind of underdetermination worry can ascend a level. So here's a dilemma for renormalization group realism. If the space of theories on which the renormalization group acts is specified, if it's circumscribed, then there's a kind of skeptical possibility that the truth lies outside that space, and no amount of assurances about what features persist under the action of the renormalization group in that space, on that space can resolve skeptical worries. That's one horn of the dilemma. The other horn, if, as a matter of fact, is true for a lot of renormalization group analyses, the space of theories isn't perfectly specified, then neither are the reassuring renormalization group results. They're just promises. They're not results. Okay, so that's the dilemma. This is a slide of quotations from serious people indicating a lot of art and craft goes into extracting renormalization group results, a lot of assumptions about what the space of theories is like, a lot of non-trivial assumptions which a lot hinges. In particular for Polchinski's result, he had to assume the theories were weakly coupled. The coupling coefficient goes to 0. That assumption, in light of that assumption, nothing can be made, quoting Tony Duncan now, concerning fundamental theories with finite couplings. So non-trivial assumptions go into framing, circumscribing the space of theories on which the renormalization group acts. Now I'm going to do a little, not quite history of science, but a little keel to history of science to try to make it seem like comforting thoughts gleaned from assumptions about the generality of a space of theories can really lead us astray. So Newton's law of universal gravitation again. Here's one way of thinking about it. It's developed among other places in a little book James Wells wrote about effective theories. You can think of it as a free theory residing in a space of perturbative corrections, where the perturbative corrections consist in adding a 1 over r cubed potential, 1 over r to the fourth, 1 over r to the fifth, so on and so on and so on and so on. So a space of potentials including, pointing at the screen, Newton's potential plus small perturbative corrections. Nobody can stop you thinking about that. And here's a payoff of thinking about Newton's law of universal gravitation that way. And we all know, tragically, it's not right. It says there's no perihelion advance, but there is. Okay. And you can, thinking of it as situated in the space of perturbative corrections, you can find 1 over r cubed, 1 over r forth corrections to it that accommodate the data we have in our solar system about perihelion events. So this mild correction to Newton's law required to accommodate perihelion events can be determined by doing a finite number of experiments. And this story might be grounds for optimism about the picture, the adequacy of the picture Newton's law gives us of the world. The optimism goes like this. No matter what the exact details of solar system physics is, its implications for phenomena at orbital radii we care about, they can be captured by a finite number of small corrections to Newton's law, and tractably captured because those corrections are experimentally determinable. And this seems like enough to say, okay, Newton's law, not perfectly true, but it's approximately true. Little corrections are needed to get all the details right. That's optimism. Here's the pessimism. You've heard it before. That's like my second slide. The pessimism is here's another way to model what's going on. The equations of motion determined by these cubic corrections are approximations to what the Schwarzschild solution says about the orbits of planets around a central gravitational force. That what we found in this space of perturbative corrections to Newton's theory is an approximation of some other theory lying outside the space, general relativity. And this theory is a salient skeptical possibility in this context in the sense that a picture of hidden springs is radically different from the picture of hidden springs that all the theories in the space agree about. So any reassurance we get from considering the space of perturbative corrections in Newton's theory predicated on sort of empirical reach of these perturbative corrections, any reassurance we get about how good, how accurate the picture of the fundamental ontology of the world Newton's theory gives us, rest on substantial and false assumptions about what the underlying truth is. Here I'm pretending, for the sake of argument, the underlying truth is general relativity. So this is just sort of meant to make the first horn of the dilemma for renormalization group realism more credible. The first horn is the true underlying theory could lie outside the space of theories considered by the renormalization group and have characters that sort of have characteristics that undermine conclusions. Okay, that was the skepticism about how viable a response to empiricist affronts renormalization group realism is. Next slides are going to raise the question of how stark an alternative to empiricism is renormalization group realism. Okay, so now I'm going to bracket concerns about whether it's an adequate response to the pessimistic meta-induction or not. I'm going to ask, what are we licensed to believe according to renormalization group realism? And are the beliefs licensed distinct from the beliefs a humble empiricist would be comfortable with? So the robustness criterion, renormalization group realism, it's real, it's going to persist. If it's invariant under the action of the renormalization group. So here are some strong candidates for endorsement according to this criterion. The renormalized couplings that locate the effective theory in the space of to which the renormalization group flow carries high energy theories. Renormalized couplings are a similar case of something invariant under the action of the renormalization group flow. But ideally, these are measurable. Sort of part of what's so beautiful about the whole story. This measurability is key to the solution to the real problem. And insofar as these renormalized couplings are measurable, they seem like exactly the sort of thing humble empiricists are happy to endorse. It's part of experimentally accessible phenomena. I mean, something else invariant under the action of the renormalization group flow. Remember, it was criterion for what made the flow it was in Polchinski's analysis are these correlation functions, these analytic functions. They're endorsed by the robustness criterion. They're invariant under the renormalization group flow. So that's something the renormalization group realist can believe in. But what does this belief amount to depends on how we understand the correlation functions, what the correlation functions are taken to be. One way of understanding them is just as empirical gadgets. Through the LSD reduction formula, they're related to S-matrix elements and to scattering cross-sections. If that's your read on what a correlation function is, then believing in a correlation function is believing in sort of the empirical content of the theory. It's the kind of belief an empiricist is happy to commit. But there's other ways of understanding correlation functions. For instance, There's a way of talking about them in the free theory where that two-point function describes a photon of one momentum being created here while another one is destroyed here. Whereas these understanding of correlation functions in terms of what's happening with the fields and their behavior in space and time, these understandings are mediated by a good old-fashioned interpretation. A story about what the theory is about. A story giving you an account of worlds the theory is true of. So the commitment to correlation functions in a sense that would be unpleasant for the empiricist is commitment to correlation functions under some interpretation of the theory in which they occur. And the commitment is articulated by the interpretation and justified insofar as the interpretation is defensible. And that would be enough, I think, to distinguish that commitment from commitment congenial to the empiricist. But my point is, those pieces aren't afforded by the Renormalization Group Realism approach. The robustness criterions delivered the correlation functions as worthy of commitment. But what's missing is a story about what those things are such that endorsing them is a realist commitment distinct from an empiricist commitment. Another way renormalization group realism might be alternative, and though I'm running over, I'm going to slip this in because it makes the emergence point, is there's ways of applying the criterion where you wind up committed to things like quarks and hadrons. And empiricists aren't committed to quarks and hadrons, so that would be a way of prosecuting renormalization group realism in a way that distinguishes it from empiricism. So what's going on in this chart is the sort of example throughout my exposition was this nice phi-4 theory, and what happens in the transition from higher energy to lower energy scales is the same fields appear in the Lagrangian, they just appear with different coupling coefficients. But there's also examples of effective theories and their underlying physical basis, where what happens when you travel the route to the effective theory is the fields in the effective Lagrangian are not the exact same fields as the fields in the underlying Lagrangian. So in cases, the electroweak theory is a higher energy theory than Fermi theory. Fermi's theory, they're just fermions. In the electroweak theory, there's fermions plus the gauge bosons, the plus the W minus. So as you move to the effect theory, there's fewer fields. QCD squared, there's quarks and gluons. At lower energy scales, there's protons and neutrons. There's different fields. And so following the family relations between lower energy and higher energy theories, you can discover things like fields keeping track of what entities they are. Might be present at some scales, but not others. And a question about ontology is what's going on. Does this kind of scale dependence of what's in your Lagrangian, does that compromise the robustness? If protons and neutrons are robust at scale little l, but go away at higher energy scales, what kinds of things are they? And I think there's a lot of work to be done here. The commitment, the grammar of the commitment endorsed by the robustness criterion is real at scale L. What does that mean? What is it for something to be real at scale L? What kind of ontological commitment is that? How is reality at scale L, is that a kind of emergence? How is it related to other kinds of emergence? I'll skip the intermediate points, but just flag that question. Reality, the realities picked up by the robustness criterion are scale-dependent realities. They have a kind of scale dependence. How do you make sense of that? And one possibility is legitimate commitment to hadrons for real at scale L is just commitment to their utility for organizing phenomena at scale L. And that seems like the kind of commitment a realist can live with. Sorry, an empiricist can live with. Okay. So if the robustness criterion endorses commitment to things like quarks and hadrons, that sounds like a distinctively realist commitment. But examining the nature of the commitment, noticing this at scale L rider to the notion of real or existent, sort of destabilizes, makes it unclear exactly whether the commitment's a sort empiricist would need to reject. So I want to close, because I'm a pretty conciliatory person, by trying to suggest grounds for reconciliation between renormalization group realists and humble empiricists. And the reconciliation is going to be mediated by realizing they have a common enemy. And their common enemy is the hubristic realist. So here's what she thinks. She thinks interesting theories are fundamental. They admit that we should endorse interpretations that completely explain their success. By contrast, the renormalization group realist is interested in effective theories. Effective theories have virtues. They're adequate to in-scope phenomena. But their adequacy, thanks to these renormalization group analyses, can be understood as something independent of their grip on what lies beneath the phenomena. The humble empiricist also thinks theories have virtues. They're merely empirically adequate. They say phenomena. Concerning why they say phenomena, the humble empiricist is agnostic. So here's a list of diagnostic questions we might ask each of these characters. And the point is, for most of these questions, the renormalization group realist sides with the humble empiricist against the hubristic realist. Do our best theories reveal hidden springs? Yes, the hubristic realist says. No, the others say. Is commitment to theories commitment to its hidden springs? Yes, the hubristic realist says. No, the others say. Must is a big question. Must we interpret a theory to explain its success? The hubristic realist thinks, yeah, that's the only way to understand why it succeeds. The renormalization group realist and the humble empiricist have different explanations of theoretical success. Are quarks real? Here there might be more overlap between renormalization group realism and hubristic realism, but I tried to flag that there's a real question about how to understand commitment to reality at a scale. Okay, so this is my conclusion. It's a picture of the history of the scientific realism debate, where things only happen once every 20 years or so. So in 1964, Wilfred Sellers wrote a paper, I'm just going to work with its title, Scientific Realism or Irenic Instrumentalism. So circa 1964, the options were believe theories or don't take them literally. Be a realist or be an instrumentalist. Some 16 years later, Bas van Frossen urged there's another position, the position he called constructive empiricism, defended in the scientific image. A third option, you can take a theory literally, it doesn't mean you have to believe it. There's lots of other reasons than believing in it to take theories literally. And now finally, 30 years later, here's a new option possibly. Renormalization group realism. You can believe a theory, but don't take it literally. And one of the questions I've tried to flag about the content of renormalization group realism is whether the position can be distinguished from empiricism without traveling pretty far down the road of good old-fashioned interpretations, affording realist apt contents than renormalization group realists seem interested in going. That is my talk. Thank you.
Cool. I think I'm gonna need to.
Yeah.
We're gonna get feedback if I don't sort of. Well, I'm not gonna hear them unless I turn the sound on. From time to time. Sure. Yeah. I'll pass it over to you if you need to put a slide there. Okay. I'm really having trouble. Geneva, you want to give a question first?
Yes.
Ooh.
Speaking of introductions,
Yeah. You're going to have to mute your end when you're speaking. Okay. Not mute the microphone, mute the speaker.
do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So let's start by asking the question. Maybe you need to switch off your mic.
Can't you switch off your speakers? I can do the mic. It's just a pain.
we were worried about the full generality. Okay? So then you were worried about the full generality, that you could have a true theory which reveals the true hidden springs outside of the theory space considered by the Renormalization Group Realism. And that would be, of course, sort of a skeptical scenario that seems perfectly conceivable. So there's this sort of worry from external, from outside of that framework. But it seems that there could be a distinct worry that was alluded to in the quote by Duncan, perhaps, that's more internal to the framework of Renormalization Group Realism. Namely, the worry that for certain relevant cases, there may just be no fixed points. There may be no results of Paczynski. There may be no finite dimension.
I don't know why I decided to freeze.
Sufficiently that we can get reassurance that we got things right at that scale. I suppose that would be a skeptical scenario for the Renormalization Group Realist as well, right?
I think that's. I think that's absolutely a concern, but I think the Renormalization Group Realist might have this way of accommodating it, and the way relies on a kind of humility. So one of the points about Renormalization Group Realism is that it's local, is that it funds an account only of theories that fall under the right kind of renormalization group analysis, and about the other theories, the realist is kind of on her own according to this position. And I think what you're pointing out is that even for the kinds of theories I'm talking about, it could be that fewer of them are apt for Renormalization Group Realism than one might expect. And one way things can go wrong is, as you said, you just don't get the right kind of renormalization group results, or you get them, but they're purchased by patently implausible assumptions about the space of theories or the application of the renormalization group to them. So yeah, I agree that's a worry for the scope of realism afforded by this strategy, but I think there's a way the Renormalization Group Realist can classify it as a worry about realisms they wouldn't endorse just because they'd only endorse realisms undergirded by the right sort of renormalization group analysis. It's weird.
Again, so you're the expert. I don't really know much about renormalization group techniques, but how much of a problem is that really for the sort of physics that you care about?
Chris, you got to turn the speakers off as well as the mic, I think, because we're getting echoing. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's lots of work being done on articulating, they call it exact renormalization group analyses of theories, but the name notwithstanding, as the Duncan quote lets on, as the Della quote lets on, the work rests on a lot of approximations and a lot of sort of artful restricting of spaces of theories. But that's science. Like, in order to do science at all, you sort of have to make some assumptions about the field you're dealing with. There aren't many renormalization group analyses that are as explicit and as clean as Polchinski's. People are working on characterizing broader class analyses, but there's always going to be scope for the kind of concern you're raising. And the point I was trying to make is, even granting people the latitude to do science by making some assumptions about how the field is arrayed. The point I'm trying to make is, even if you sort of acknowledge a kind of result in this vicinity as perfectly explicit and legit, you can still worry that the perfectly explicit and legit space on which the perfectly explicit and legit renormalization group acts is limited in a way that's salient for debates over what the world is really like.
Can I put a finger on that one? I mean, because there is a class about which we do know that there's a fixed point for this, namely the asymptotically free theories, right? So there's a lot of theories of interest that which this picture does apply, the ones that, like, I mean, physically relevant ones.
No, that's yeah, yes.
Fingering. So, just to recap your qualification, so would you say that the Renormalization Group Realist should only be a realist about theories that either are fixed points or which flow from fixed points in DPV?
I don't, so you might be able to help me. I don't see how to transfer the kind of ontological commitment to theories where you can't show there's fixed points.
Yes. Yeah, so I think so too, yeah.
Okay.
So the 5-4 example very likely wouldn't count, actually, because it's when we believe that there's a Landau pole at some point. No one can prove it in 4 dimensions.
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Which is bad news because that's the Higgs, right? So.
Well, yeah, I mean, so, I mean, does this relate to your, general question about what's the scope of the framework, which is entitled in this
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So why can't we say, hey, here's a renormalization group where string theory flows to standard QFT, right? And there are people who, you might think that there's some framework under which there's an unperturbed theory and it flows to the Higgs included in the standard model, but it's just not the present framework.
Let's see if Chris has. Chris, do you have questions there? Yeah, okay.
I just have a question about what exactly is the problem with realism at the scale at scale L. You mentioned that there is a kind of conceptual issue there. What is it exactly?
Yeah, so I've got a way of locating QCD in a space of theories where at some scales it seems like there's hadrons, but other scales there's just quarks. And I'm imagining opponent of the realist saying, what kind of criterion of reality is this where it matters to what's real, what scale you're looking at? It's a sort of long-standing impediment to the objectivity of something, to think its presence is perspective dependent. So the form of the worry is if whether there's hadrons or not depends on the scale you're considering phenomena at, then there aren't really hadrons. It's that kind of move. And I meant to be, it could be you're just more pointedly asking the question I meant to be asking. So this is a prima facie worry for a criterion of commitment that has a kind of scale dependence built into it. What kind of reality, what does it mean to say reality is scale dependent?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I can't look at the camera.
Right,
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, but can't the realists, in the case of renormalization group, just try to give an account about the relationship at different scales in order to...
Yeah, no, yeah.
Sorry.
No, absolutely. It's not only, I mean, it's not, they can and they kind of have to. That's the point. There's sort of missing something like metaphysics here. There's a sort of missing story about what real at a scale L, what it means to praise something, endorse something as real at a scale L. And yeah, they could well tell a story about what's there at lower scales and what's there at higher scales. But I think the history of philosophy shows that those are sorts of delicate, hard stories to tell. And I think part of what's philosophically exciting about this is maybe trying to tell the story in this really clean, precise, interesting framework connected to physics might lay bare ways of telling the story that haven't emerged in like the philosophy of mind or other philosophy of biology or other sorts of areas where emergence and reduction are issues. So yeah, by raising the question, I meant to encourage approaches to answering it, and that's one approach. But yeah, the details need to be filled in, and that's exciting. Okay.
Are there more questions there, Chris?
I have a follow-up.
Oh.
Yeah, so what's the difference between this question and the question about the very simple question about what kind of things there are at different levels? So we say there are chairs, of course, but we go to the micro or there are electrons.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still say both are real, both electrons and chairs are real. It's only like a matter of what scale you're working in. But I mean, I want to see what's different between that kind of question and this kind of question.
Yeah, so one difference is the background analytical framework. You've got a better grip on supposing we got a handle on an appropriate space of theories, what higher level theories, how they manifest in lower energy theories in these cases than we do about what exactly the constituent particles have to do with the chair. But there's this similarity. When I say there's chairs at the scale of ordinary dry goods, and say electrons, protons, and neutrons at subatomic scales, and there's some relation between the former and the latter. It's a question about the details of the relation, and there's also questions about what I mean when I say there's chairs at ordinary dry goods scales. Do I mean, am I making a claim about a possible reduction? If I'm not making a claim about a possible reduction, what kind of claim am I making? And am I simply saying that for creatures like us, it's useful to organize the entities we find in our vicinity into chairs and tables, even though there's no thoroughgoing reduction? Those are questions. And one of the points I was trying to make is if you go the kind of, it's pragmatically appropriate to sort things into chairs, but there's no perfect reduction, then you're not going in a way that distinguishes your commitment to chairs from empiricists. Can I feel people's...
There's one more question from Geneva. Is it, or was it on this topic?
This seemed to be, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, yeah. So, but you might nonetheless think like, I can, predicate a table that's X long, that's round, right? And I can think that I could have reasonably solidly about those facts, and not think that the chairs of the table is a figment of my imagination, right? But I'll remain silent about, was the chair really, or is the table really a thing that's there, or is there something like some strata that it emerges from? And I guess I'm wondering, is there something like open for the RG realist about hadrons, for example, and would you advocate something like this?
So how would the similar line go?
I don't know. I believe that there's a hadron and it has experimental, but I don't know anything about how it's related to
that.
the
So that does seem like one of the options. There's lots of options, but saying that little about it's not a very satisfying realist commitment. Yeah. What are you committed to? Its existence. Okay, you told me that when you told me we were a realist, but tell me more about what you're committed to. Yeah, but I've gotten as far as thinking there's questions of ontology and metaphysics here that seem similar to questions of ontology and metaphysics that have arisen in other domains, but I haven't worked out answers to them via different approaches. So I'm probably going to say a lot of, yeah, that might work, I don't know.
Let's go over to Geneva. They have a question, so brace yourselves.
Do you hear me?
Yes, well, I guess. Can you give them the thumbs?
Can I
Just stop and see whether it works.
But I will repeat my question. Could you explain to me the relationship between Lagrangian and theories? I'm not sure there is this usage of calling Lagrangian theories, or saying quantum field theories. There does not seem to be theories at all. The question is, should we take this seriously, or is there some kind of correspondence we can go back and forth?
I mean, for present purposes,
I can't even hear you. Go.
for present purposes, it was stipulative. We were associating theories with Lagrangians. I think in general with physics, an uninterpreted mathematical formalism isn't a physical theory. It follows that a part of an uninterpreted mathematical formalism like Lagrangian isn't a physical theory. Physical theories are always already partially interpreted. So depending on what you want to do with a quantum field theory, you might need to say a lot more than what its Lagrangian is. But a lot of the core things you want to do with a quantum field theory, the Lagrangian and things we can extract from it, get us a lot of the way. And taking a quantum field theory to be an entity even richer than a Lagrangian, I think makes the going even harder for realists than simplifying a quantum field theory down to the core afforded by its Lagrangian. So I think I can take on board the suggestion that it's a simplistic and inaccurate way of identifying quantum field theories to identify them with Lagrangians without my main point being undermined, which is even if you identify quantum field theories in that way, this sort of promising route to being realists about some parts of those quantum field theories requires supplementing in interesting ways and is subject to some of the skeptical worries similar to the skeptical worries it was meant to resolve. I take your point, but I'm not that shaken by it, is my answer. Is he talking?
Because I think I'm not sure that it really answers my question, because but I'm not sure I understand what quantum field theory is. Maybe it's not just Lagrangian, maybe something more, but that seems to be some kind of mathematical object, which is not the kind of thing which can be believed. For instance, you cannot believe a Lagrangian, and in the sense in which it is used in physics and mathematics, you cannot believe a quantum field theory. So my question was whether there is the correspondence was between quantum field theories in the physicist sense, or there is a correspondence between quantum field theories and theories in, say, Wilfrid Seller's sense. You recover a theory.
Can you hear me? So Lagrangians are going to be closer to theories in the physicist sense, but even for physicists to use them, they've got to say something about what the elements of the mathematical formalism correspond to. And my Wilfrid Seller's sense of theory is the one I'm familiar with, is a theory consists of a model and a commentary on a model. So maybe you can take the Lagrangian to be part of the model, and then I think what I'm trying to say in response to you is there's always got to be some commentary on the model to even do physics, and it's philosophically interesting to keep track of just how much commentary on the model you need to do different physical things. But from the point of view of circumscribing realist commitment, I'm not sure it's a mistake to start with a Lagrangian. I'm not clear on what sort of alternate approach for those who would be realists you're suggesting on the basis of observing a Lagrangian isn't a theory. So I asked a question for you.
Are you okay? Is that done?
It's fine.
Okay. More questions from over here then. Sebastian.
So I take your point about the idea that we could think of other theories outside the renormalization group, and so that might bring some doubts about this strategy. I was thinking you could always raise that question, right? So no matter like what theory, no matter what context, you can always say you haven't thought about other theories outside this possibility. So I was wondering if your question, your criticism here is kind of very skeptical for the realist. The realist is going to say, yeah, but so far the best theories we have is this one, and maybe that's not true, but let's say it is true. Then I don't want to be that skeptical, and I want to stay with theories that satisfy the renormalization group or something like that. But what would you say or what answer to that?
Yeah, maybe I'll answer in two stages. One is the dialectic is, so it's a standard skeptical move. You haven't considered the right, how do you know you've considered the right theory? Why be so confident that the theory that's the winner so far is the right theory if the set of theories we've considered so far is so limited? That's a kind of standard skeptical move. Then part of what was interesting about the renormalization group response is it seemed like it took that skepticism on board and used the thought that we don't know what other theories there are as a realist resource. And the way that thought got to be a realist resource is by using renormalization group analyses to summarize the implications of other theories whose details we don't know for physics at our scale. We can identify features of physics at our scale that are invariant under differences in details between the theories we don't know. And that seemed like a promising advance in the cause of realism. And then I just pointed out, as you remarked, that nevertheless, the promising advance is susceptible to the same sort of concerns similar to the we haven't considered all the theories concern, which is the renormalization group results are relative to a space of theories, and that might be limited in ways that are skeptically salient. So you're right, it is just the same move. It's meant to be kind of interesting that it's the same move because it looked like the renormalization group realist strategy neutralized the move. And to a certain extent it neutralizes the move, but not entirely. And then as for, this is just the way it is for science, you can always give this sort of reason for withholding ontological commitment from our best theories. I absolutely agree, and it's like one man's modus tollens is another man's modus ponens. Like one thing you can think is that means there's no reason to withhold commitment. Another thing you can think is that the reason to withhold commitment always. And it might just be like a philosophical Rorschach test, what your reaction to that is. My reaction is you should withhold commitment. But if that's not your reaction, I'm not sure how to talk you into it. So I'll retreat to the resolution of underdetermination worries afforded by the renormalization group considerations is maybe less universal than it might first have seemed, as the point I'm trying to make. And that's up to you and your philosophical conscience how you respond to underdetermination worries.
Maybe are there reasons to believe that there are other theories outside the renormalization group that might explain things or something like that? Because that would be like a very good reason to be skeptical.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a question about like the space of theories or the future of science, and if I could answer it, I wouldn't be here. But I mean, you just can observe the spaces these gadgets act on are limited. There's assumptions about their occupants, and it's certainly logically possible that there be physical theories that don't make those assumptions.
Oh, you kind of must have had a short question already, so Tom.
Thanks. So maybe just slightly on the same line. So I took the input of your talk to be something like taking on board everything that Renormalization Group Realist says, gives you no more reason gives you no reason to depart from your already existing empiricist line, empiricist line. And I mean that seems right, but doesn't that sort of misrepresent the dialectic? I mean, I don't know about these other guys, but let's take David Wallace, who already is a structural realist, presumably in part by the sort of World style argument, best of both worlds. If we look at the historical record, well, we can preserve our intuitions by structural realists. And then someone like Carl Stanford complains that, well, you're just going to say whatever comes along next, whatever structure that shares, that was preserved. It's not very predictive take on the history of physics. Can't you give us some sort of reassurances as to what structure will be preserved in future physics? And then here comes the Renormalization Group Realist and says, I can give you a very precise account of what I expect to be preserved, and here's why. I mean, doesn't that put the structural realists who adopted structural realism, this moral style realism, doesn't that put them in a better position than they were previously? And if you've already got a commitment to structural realism.
Yeah. I sort of blew through this pretty quickly at the beginning, but part of what I admire about the Renormalization Group Realist approaches is structure. I mean, the Worrell paper is amazing. It's so suggestive, but it's so hard to make positive suggestion precise. Like, what is structure? There are structural realists who I'm pretty sure they have a handle on it, but what they mean and how exactly it serves to tell me what to believe right now has always eluded me. And this way of circumscribing the locus of commitment, it's committal, it's clear. So it's, I think, a real advance in the art of selective realism. It's a genuine selection criterion for belief, not just a suggestion. So I agree that this is a way of prosecuting the Worrell program. I'm not sure I'm happy to call it structural realism, because I'm not sure what's getting picked out is structure in the relevant sense. That's because I don't know what structure is. I know a structuralist guy say, that's what I meant by structure all along. And I'd be like, okay, now I finally understand you. So that's my take on the dialectic. But I still want to say, I'm not sure the structural realist is in a stronger position than the Renormalization Group. I'm not sure that's what you were suggesting, but
yeah, I think there's something being added there.
Oh, it's something being added to structural realism.
Or vice versa.
Structural realism is adding something. Okay.
Separable.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I don't see that. So here's a way of identifying. Living in the best of both worlds. Here's a way of identifying what I'm believing when I'm doing that. And I'm trying to suggest the commitments so identified either are subject to the same kind of skeptical worries, like the pessimistic meta-induction that motivated the move to structural realism to begin with, or in fact are a lot more like empiricist friendly commitments than might first seem. And this is partly my failure for not really having an independent grip on what structural realism is. I don't see the structural realist maneuver as rebutting or weakening either of those considerations. Yeah.
I was thinking that Sharon Schwaber in the affective field theories paper, I mean, kind of to say that this will be preserved, but I didn't make Tian a structural realist. I mean, so I don't know. Maybe there's a gap there. I think we have time for about one more question, and well, Nick, you didn't really have a question before. Okay.
But if there's only one more question, then he should go.
Okay.
We can.
Well, Mike.
No, so this is just another kind of query about the faux generality. And so I think you characterize the renormalization, like you group together what's common to all renormalization group realists pretty effectively by saying the idea is that we need to give some kind of selection criteria for which aspects of the theory are supposed to be reliable. Then you point to the kind of severe restrictions on the actually available results. Like, so for the example you gave us in the Polchinski result, we need things like weak coupling, just so that we can do perturbation theory. We only have perturbative characterizations of these theories. So that's fine. But why is the renormalization group realist limited to having a restriction to scale, only selection criteria? Why can't we say we also know that kind of the kind of characterization that we have of most field theories is just one that's valid in this perturbative regime, and another selection criteria that we're going to impose is that we're only going to trust quantum field theories with four processes that that exhibit weak coupling. We know that there are such processes. We can measure them. Here is the right answer. So are we limited to just this one particular kind of selection criteria, not just the more? I mean, that's also a kind of principle selection criteria.
So that seems fair enough. I'm a little bit concerned about the move. We're limiting attentions that exhibit weak coupling. I'm sorry, limiting attention to processes that exhibit weak coupling. That's not the same as assuming the underlying processes are weakly coupled. I'm asking you, is it something that we can assess empirically? Is there something risky about that move?
I don't think so. I think we have independent reasons to think that gravity is weakly towards electromagnetic interaction style things for way. So yeah, I mean maybe it's good to think about like what could be independent grounds for thinking that the processes in question are weakly coupled. I think one could provide such a
let's talk about, because I'm not sure. Absolutely, there's no reason to limit the considerations to considerations of scale. The thought is robustness is what we're after. There might be different ways, more fruitful ways of characterizing robustness. That'd be great.
I think, Nick, if it's not too long,
Can I ask you about the ironic slide? The chart?
Yeah.
Do you want to say
that was kind of a joke.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The stirring
right?
conclusion, yeah.
No, well, actually, the one with the squares, the table, sorry. But was it? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Was it still an assumption of the RGR view here that the RGR person wants to have the present theory be some kind of decent approximation to T-bang?
No, well.
Because that's going to matter for the difference between RGR and HE, right?
Yeah. So, it's hard to keep track of how to use the word approximation.
Yes, and I don't myself want to give it a sense.
Yeah,
but, But
so the
RGR, you did use that as an argument.
Right. So the RGR,
as a way of putting the RGR person in a dilemma.
Yeah. So I should add. Okay, this is fair. I should add a row. Are there elements of T that will persist in T bang?
Yes.
And I think that is a ground on which the Renormalization Group Realist and the hubristic realist agree. However, I feel like the asterisks in the bottom row is relevant to that ground.
I do agree, yes, I agree.
Yeah, well, so is it like the persistence of the capacity to save the phenomena?
Right.
That's all right with empiricists.
Yeah, it also does seem like whether or not you want to go for non-perturbatively renormalizable versus perturbatively renormalizable is very relevant to this issue as well, right? By high standard, then you would want to know there's a fixed point in
right.
PV. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And the empiricist just might not want to have any of that.
Right, which is, I mean, there might be, the empiricist is allowed to keep pragmatic reasons for doing things onto her picture of science, so that might be enough to want perturbative control, but yeah, there's a very shallow way of doing empiricism where that doesn't matter.
Okay, Well, I think we're going to have to call it a day. I know we could probably keep going, but the guys are 7 hours ahead of us, so that
Oh, wow.
the fondue will be
They need
congealing, and they need to go eat. Is that okay? Okay. We have
Thank
some sound of
you.
them. So bye. Let's say thanks to Laura again.